you can't write a good you can't even write a good biography in 2 months, let alone 2 weeks. So these books, those books particularly, anything which has come out since Michael Jackson died, pretty much is just drivel, just badly researched, rushed drivel, But a lot of what was written before Michael Jackson died was drivel as well. And part of it is because he was so secretive, and he was so unwilling to speak to the press and to speak to writers that they I think some of them kind of had it in for him because they felt that it was a slight, you can see it, you can trace it with a finger on a timeline, the less Jackson spoke to the press, the more malicious they got, perhaps because they thought, this guy is so famous, why wouldn't he give us a piece of the pie? All it takes is three sentences or something, and we've got a front page story. But also, I think the fact that he was so quiet for most of his adult career just made it difficult for people to track down the truth. And when you make things difficult for some journalists, they just get lazy. Rather than doing their jobs, rather than doing the difficult research, they just go, oh, I'll just write what I want. I mean, a classic example is Ian Halperin's book. Now, elements of Ian Halperin's book seem to be accurate, but it's just full of these glaring inaccuracies, stories that were disproved even before Jackson died. He has these stories in his book, for instance, that Michael Jackson didn't show up at rehearsals for the This Is It concerts. And now we have the This Is It film, which clearly shows that he did. He has stories in his book that Jackson couldn't sing anymore and couldn't dance anymore. We see in This Is It that he could. He had a story in his book that he claimed he'd seen Michael Jackson's contract, and he was only due to be on stage for 15 minutes a night at the O2 concerts or something. Whereas you look at This Is It, and again, you can clearly see that Jackson is rehearsing about 10 songs, minimum, So, I mean, his book is just riddled with inaccuracies, which were actually disproven before it was even published. And for some reason, they published it with those inaccuracies still in it anyway. That's how lazy the publishing industry is,
And Ian Halperin is paraded out there as a Michael Jackson expert on mass media TV.
Yeah, that's quite correct. He is, and like I said, there are elements of his book which are accurate, but most of the accurate parts of his book and reliable parts are actually just already well-established information, which you can read in Randy Taraborelli's book, or Aphrodite Jones's book, or Mary Fischer's GQ article. In terms of new material in Ian Halperin's book, in terms of actual journalism, him actually going out and finding information, finding facts, there is just, it's just completely inaccurate. You have all these claims about the This Is It concerts, every single one of which is completely disproven by the film, apart perhaps from the stories that Jackson was ill, which you wouldn't see in the film. But, you can clearly see that Jackson wasn't rehearsing for only 13 minutes. That's ludicrous. And you can see that Jackson was at rehearsals, because if he wasn't, then there wouldn't be any video of him. These stories, it just amazes me, it baffles me. I ordered his book when it came out. I pre-ordered it, and it arrived, on the day that it was due out, and I read it in a day, because I was hoping that it would be interesting and informative, but really it was just full of rehashed information and completely inaccurate reporting. And it just astounds me that the publishing industry would allow a book like that to go to print.
And then there wouldn't be stories about the inaccuracies in it. It's let's talk about the what's happening now in print journalism and journalism on the web. This copy and paste idea, where someone will say some kind of salacious thing, and it'll get out there on one outlet, and then it'll be picked up by. Tell us what you found about that.
I did write a piece about that just 2 weeks ago, I think, for the Huffington Post, which is exactly about that, exactly about copy and paste journalism. At the beginning of February, Gene Simmons of Kiss, the band Kiss, made he made some allegations about Jackson in an interview with Classic Rock magazine, and he said, completely inaccurate. He said Michael Jackson was on tape ordering alcohol for children, which of course he was not. That was never produced in court. Jackson was in court on misdemeanor charges of providing alcohol to a minor. If that tape had ever existed or been played in court, then he would have been found guilty on those charges. There was, it just didn't happen. It just did not happen. I don't know where Gene Simmons got it from. It seems to be a figment of his imagination, but it just didn't happen. He said that at Jackson's trial, a travel agent had taken the stand and testified to flying in boys from Brazil for Jackson's amusement. Again, that is a complete fiction. That just did not happen. That testimony was never heard at Jackson's trial. So I don't know what it is. I don't know if he's maybe going senile or if he's just making it up because he thinks it will earn him column inches or something. But it just did not happen. Just didn't happen. And the last comment he made was that he knew a musician on a Jackson tour who had quit because they kept seeing young boys in the hotels, which I'll come to in a second. So these comments that he made in Classic Rock go up on Google News. Classic Rock releases it as a trailer for their new issue, and it goes on Google News. So somebody sees it on Google News and goes, "Oh, that's a salacious story about Michael Jackson. That'll get people clicking onto my website. I'll have that. Copy and paste it. Box. Now it's on 2 websites on Google News. So it raises up the rankings, which means more people find it, which means more people say, "Oh, that's an interesting story about Michael Jackson," which will get people to come to my website. Copy and paste, copy and paste, copy and paste. Now you've got 10 outlets. You've got 10 outlets reporting this inaccurate story about Michael Jackson. Now it's on the front page of Google News because it's been reported by 10 outlets. So even more people see it and copy and paste it onto their websites. So before you know it, you have these dozens of outlets who are just reproducing these allegations with absolutely no attempt to fact-check them. And it's not difficult. They could contact someone like me. They could contact someone like Aphrodite Jones or Thomas Mesereau, who would just say, "No, that testimony, it just didn't exist. That just didn't happen. I don't know where you're getting that from." With regard to the comment about on the road with Michael Jackson, I easily fact-checked that as well. I went to Jennifer Batten, who was Michael Jackson's guitarist on every single one of his tours. So she toured with him on and off for a decade. Whenever Jackson was on the road, she was with him. And I just said, "Do you have any recollection of anyone quitting a Jackson tour ever?" And she said, "No. Not only did nobody quit a Jackson tour for that reason, nobody quit a Jackson tour full stop. That's just a complete fiction. I was on every Jackson tour, and nobody ever quit." So there you have, that draws a line under all of Gene Simmons' claims. Every single thing that he said was proven to be inaccurate. And it was so easy to disprove. Because all I did was I typed, you go to Google, you type in Michael Jackson tour guitarist, and up comes Jennifer Batten. You click on her website, and there's an email me button. How difficult is that? Why is the media so lazy? You're talking 40 seconds on Google, and another 30 to write the email. It's just so lazy. It's unbelievably lazy. This copy and paste journalism. I know, because of the recession and the rise of the internet, there is less money. There's less money in the news industry. Journalists are being fired, so you've got less journalists trying to fill more space, which means they have less time to spend on their stories. But it's just ridiculous. They're not so pushed for time that they can't spend 40 seconds on Google and 30 seconds writing an email just to fact check. That's the fundamental of journalism. Just fact check. If Gene Simmons says this about Michael Jackson, then don't just print it because you don't know whether it's true. I think the attitude is, "Oh, well, he said it, not us." But that's not really the point. It's still bad journalism. It was so easy for me to fact check those allegations and disprove them. But rather than doing that, the media just copy-paste, and all of a sudden it's all over the world. It's in India, it's in Australia, it's in the USA, it's in the UK, it's everywhere. And then, as if to add insult to injury, I tracked down Jennifer Batten. I got that denial from her. I got her to elaborate on that. I gave it to a news outlet, and they put it on Google News. And whereas dozens of people picked up the salacious story about Jackson, within 2 weeks, only 4 news outlets in the world were carrying Jennifer Batten's retraction, which basically says, the media is willing to publish any baseless but salacious allegation about Michael Jackson, but they're unwilling to print the facts which disprove those allegations.